Welcome to the podcast. This is Sundays with Stories, brought to you by our online addiction program, the Life Process Program. I'm here, as always, with Dr. Stanton Peele, who is the creator of the program. Dr. Peele, how you doing?
Wonderful to be with you over the, transition of the year, and we're trying something a little daring, a little self-exposing, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. But it works for this time of year. It's a time of year when many of us make resolutions, and a lot of which are either empty promises to ourselves or unrealistic goals. And here we're going to discuss healthy ways to think about and process mistakes and misfortune, how to adopt a mindfully optimistic attitude towards life, and how to set goals that are achievable and long-lasting and which can build on themselves. And for three reasons, I think, that I wanted to do this. One, as I said, it's appropriate and sort of festive for this time of year to reflect and come up with resolutions. The second is that it'll be good to model setting resolutions in the style that we encourage others to do, creating goals, I guess we could say. But the third is that I think they'll actually help us demonstrate in good faith that we're no angels. It's maybe just somewhat disarming to do that. Like, we happen to have strong convictions when it comes to personal development and how to overcome addiction, but we've never said that, and we never mean to say that we're perfect. So, we'll go for it, and what's the worst that could happen?
Well, I think it's a very brave concept. I hope I can match up to your daring in suggesting it. But
it sounds like you're up for the challenge.
I can't turn down a challenge. I just don't have it in me. So if you're daring enough to Jacob did write a good book title. Just say yes.
Jacob Solomon, yeah.
Jacob Solomon. Anytime anybody suggests something to me, I always say yes. It's a good thing nobody says anything too crazy, but I always say yes.
Since I know you're going to say yes, may I ask you a few questions about your goals and maybe even some of your mishaps of the past? And I'll let you turn the tables on me after we're done.
All right, and you're my role model in this. I think you're a good person for exposing himself, unselfconsciously.
Will you provide an example of a mistake you've made in the past year or something recently, something that you would and will do differently if you found yourself in the same situation? Now, I have follow-up questions, but we can leave it there, and I can ask them to you one by one, or we can do the whole...
Let's start there. I had a friend who wrote me saying that he was in crisis. And, I was sort of staring at that and wondering, well, what am I supposed to do when somebody tells you that? It's not something he tells me all the time. And I'm thinking, well, he must be asking me for help. And so I kind of intruded myself on his process, but he wasn't really asking for help. I mean, in general, and this gets into our whole therapeutic model, people generally don't want you to tell them what they should be doing. It doesn't work. They're not going to just follow your instructions. They've already thought a lot about it, and they're in some kind of a process in dealing with it. And you have to respect who they are and how they've gotten there. And so, I put myself too much forward. And, he sort of wrote me back a note. It wasn't curt or anything, but it sort of said, I'm already dealing with this, or kind of mind your own beeswax, or these ideas aren't going to work. And, I guess my only excuse is, why did he use the word that he was in crisis? And I guess my best guess was he was saying to me, I may seem a little preoccupied lately, and over Christmas, maybe we'll do less than we might have planned. And so he was just giving, and it's nice to be informed when a friend is undergoing something. but he wasn't asking me for advice.
So,
And so that's a problem. It's a problem I have, and it's a problem in therapy. We practice a version of motivational interviewing. Our whole life process program, the life process isn't our process, it's the person's process. And they're going to have to come into therapy, and they're going to have to leave, or not therapy, coaching, with their own way of going about their lives. And as a helper, you always have to avoid overstating your role. That's you have less of a role than you probably imagine, and no matter what your role is, like a good parent, you're not about boasting about what you've done. That's not your job. So I would say you're pretty good at that. You're a helpful person without generally seeking to lay a lot of claim to being helpful. Is that a good description of you?
I like to think so. I'm not perfect in that arena, but that's what I strive to be.
Is that
So,
you've always it's sort of a natural quality you bring to things? Would you say that you're unselfconsciously helpful? Is that something you came up with?
it's probably right. It's weird to talk about myself like that. It's like feels like I'm arrogant or bragging about myself. But that's something I focus on and think that I've honed. Yeah.
Well, I think between the two of us, it's pretty obvious that I'm a somewhat more self-congratulatory person than you. I mean, maybe somebody could say, well, it'd be good for me to tone that down. Possibly they'd say maybe in your part, it'd be good for you to jack it up. Not that, as we've often pointed out, you seem to be doing fine. You certainly you have jobs and you support your family. It's not like people don't know that you're out there doing positive things. But in my lifetime, I'm seeking to put down markers in the whole culture. That's just the way I can't change that. That's the way I was brought up. That's the way I've thought about my whole life. That's how I've designed my whole life. And so, I mean, I forget what exactly Erik Erikson's stages are in life, but one of them is, acceptance versus, I don't know, self-recrimination. And so we're negotiating that space where you can say, well, what can I tell you? This is who I am. We talked about Kirsten Dunst. Saying, well, I've got my problems. So what? Everybody has their problems. I'm not going to trade my life in. At the same time, you want to eliminate some of the worst manifestations of them. I mean, like, you don't want to piss off a good friend, or you don't want to feel awkward by, sticking your two cents in where somebody hasn't actually asked for them.
So you're 75, and I've had clients through our program who are your age and even older. And that's something that they say is they feel somewhat fixed as a person, temperamentally, the way that they see themselves in the world, except that they have this little, like they think of it like a stain that they have on it, something that they feel like they'd like to change, but maybe it's too late for me, is what they always say. And going through specific examples of a way that they behaved where they wanted one outcome and got another has been super helpful. So let me go back to your example. The outcome you wanted obviously was something like helping a friend. A person was in crisis. He let you know he was in crisis. You assumed that, why would he be reaching out to me unless he wanted me to give?
Maybe I wanted to be more involved in his life. It's sort of like, maybe he's asking me to play a larger role in his life, which is sort of a self-aggrandizing thing.
But in reality, he came back and he basically said, well, you're kind of getting in the way. Or
Well, I'm doing, I'm processing this in my own way. He has a wife. He has other friends. It's sort of like, you're overstepping your boundaries. Yeah.
do you feel that this will inform ways that you respond to similar situations in the future?
I think it's part of a general recognition on my part that, that's an error that I'm more likely to make, and that, I've done better at stepping back from. And there's an emotional component. You have to say, well, okay, I'm still okay with myself, and I'm still regarded in a positive way. This is still a friend, even though he's sort of, I don't know, wrapping my knuckles would be even too strong a word for it. He just described what he was about. And at least, and I took a positive feedback from it, in that I just said, okay, I'm glad to hear that, and I, said no more. I didn't say, then why'd you tell me you were in crisis? I didn't do that. I just thought that,
Be honest. Is this a mistake that you'll lose sleep over, or do you feel, because that's fair? I think there's an idea that there's an idea about self-development that people have, that they ought to let things go completely and just sort of move on from it and see it as growth. But I think it's totally fair to have something bog you down or make you pause or something. So I'm wondering if you were thinking about this constructively and optimistically and like, oh, I need to make a shift, or if this is something that's you feel
I had something of an emotional reaction, but less of one that I would have had in the past. I didn't get angry. I certainly didn't strike out. So I'd say I was improved. I didn't lose sleep, but when I got up in the morning, I thought about it, but then I moved on. So, that's better than I might have done in the past.
All right, that's interesting. So you let it roll off in a way that you're going to let that experience guide you in the future. And I think that is sort of how
I'm still going to interact with him probably over the holidays. And so, it defines the space that we're going to be occupying when that happens. I'm not going to offer any, well, maybe I will, but I'll be certainly more restrained in offering any advice,
So you're not, you related yourself to me in saying you're a little bit more self-absorbed. Self-absorbed is usually
promoting.
Self-promoting. Thank you. That's a better way to say it. But at the same time, you care that your reaction to your friend didn't really jibe with what he wanted, and you're thinking about your next experience with him and thinking, well, how can you make this, relationship more cohesive? I assume that's for you and for him.
Right. We're going to have to carry on having a relationship, and, and it's a template for dealing with other people. I'm closer to him than many people, but, and I know you have a small child and I have grandchildren, and I like to think of myself as a helpful person, but these same issues come up around those things. I had this is a little bit different. I have 3 grandchildren. You know some of them. 2 boys and a girl. And she was the one I was least tuned into. And she suggested that I go in halfsies with her to buy her mother a present. And first of all, I'm saying, she's 11. How did she come up with this concept? And then she had a plan for how to do it. And the plan involved going shopping with my ex-wife, her grandmother, and then somehow I would chip in a certain amount of money for the present. And I'm sort of sitting there going, all right. And, we're doing this by some kind of phone messaging, which she knows how to do. Kids can do that. And I'm going, all right. Remember, I said I always say yes. Basically, when people suggest something, if they're going to go to the trouble of organizing it. And so part of what I'm doing in all of this is reevaluating her. I'm saying, I didn't know she was such a forceful person. And then while she was buying the present with my ex-wife, she called me and said, well, it's more money than I thought. And then she suggested what I consider to be an outlandish figure. And I say, that's too much. And then she called back and she had negotiated it down with my ex-wife. And I said, okay. And then afterwards I said, well, I really just appreciate how you made all of that. And then she sent me a picture of her with my ex-wife, very friendly. All of this is, electronically. And then she goes, and I said, well, I just want to, I tell you, I appreciate how you made this all happen. And darn if she didn't say, oh, well, thank you very much. So then I, email her mother and I say, she's a very courteous girl. She's a real people mover. She knows how to be courteous. I don't know. You must be doing something right. And so, at this age, and whatever the age difference is, 65 almost years, I was willing to let her take control and just like navigate the ship and appreciate the good results.
That's pretty cool. All right, since you're becoming a little more vulnerable now, this is something that I think there's a million examples of this in your book, so this shouldn't be as hard. But what's a mistake that you've made in your career? Your career as specifically like in clinical work as a helping professional, something that upset you that was unexpected, and what do you think you could have done differently?
Well, you don't want to overstep. I sort of went in that direction. Your job's not to take credit for helping people. And in the world at large, I feel I have to claim credit for the innovations I've made. Mm-hmm. That's just my attitude towards the universe. And I'm not so apologetic about that. But at a global level, you can do that, but you can't do that at an individual level. As a parent or as a helper, you can't feel, you can't gloat or boast about whether you're helpful to people. That's a mistake. I've learned I'm much less likely to do that now. You really have to suppress that urge.
How about a goal of yours looking forward that's current, one that you feel is going to lead to self-improvement, and maybe talk about the steps that you're taking and will take to achieve it?
Well, I have a little, I'm working with somebody professionally who may have, I come on strong and I've pissed off some good partners. On the other hand, some people persist with me, and sometimes I'm surprised that they do. And I have to watch not getting aggravated with them when they seem to be somewhat resistant, and if they continue to deal with me, to be positive and appreciate that. So I can't be too demanding. I'm a demanding person. And I have to tone that back. How, my memoir is somewhat of a mixture of going, between heaven and hell and saying, it's unbelievable how many bridges I burned and how many feet I've stepped on. But on the other hand, it's sort of amazing how I'm still out there and still able to provoke people and to keep it going. So I don't want to, it's a split between learning and not becoming more obnoxious. And at the same time, when you're 75, you got to be a little bit accepting of yourself and appreciative of yourself. I think it's between self-acceptance and despair. I forget what the stages are. You can't get down on yourself in your end zone, even at the same time that you certainly don't want to make worse mistakes than you've made earlier. You want to make fewer of those.
That's not lofty, like unrealistic, broad. Do you feel, like, can you think of specific steps you're taking toward that?
Well, I work with a person who rejects a lot of my inputs, and then, which anybody who writes, unless they're, like, I don't know, Bob Dylan, but maybe even him, you're going to get a fair number of rejections. And so I think I've done better at not, rejecting that person for turning down my inputs. And then he continues to take up my inputs that seem to make sense to him, which is obviously his business. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I become less judgmental about him and less intolerant of those kinds of rejections, and more willing to just keep plowing forward. I mean, I have friends, you're an example probably. You're probably less likely to go off the deep end if somebody gives you some negative, reject some input of yours. My tendency has been to go just discount them entirely. And I think I'm a little bit better about saying, all right, we'll see when this will work out in the future.
That's really interesting. That's cool to hear. So you have sort of an acknowledgement about who you are and what you want to do and where you've gone awry in the past. So you have a general understanding of or trend that you'd like to move toward. And you can think of people along the way. You can think of someone like tomorrow you could act differently than maybe you would have otherwise, which is cool. That's a way that we.
Well, another thing we've talked often about how having choice, there's periods in my career where I was completely submerged, where I couldn't get anything published, especially during the kickback to the early harm reduction in the 1980s to 1990s. I was like blacklisted. I couldn't get published anywhere or invited to speak anywhere. So, I mean, I do have a mantra that we've spoken about. I can say, however bad anything gets now, man, I was nowhere. I was completely underwater. And you have to be able, I think, to be able to resurface that. And say, I'm just reading the memoir of Anne Pichette, the famous novelist. She's, I think, as famous a novelist, contemporary novelist as there is. But there are periods in her life where she was nowhere. And, I think she's around 60 now. Life is long. You're going to have some ups and downs. And, like I say, it's some of those stages of Erickson's. You can never, you can't give in to despair. And we've taken that one step farther with Bonanno and your and my discussions of trauma. You have to appreciate your trauma. You have to say, whew, could have, I've been in a lot worse situations than this.
I had a really interesting conversation with a person, someone who follows our work. And the person talks about their own traumatic events of the past and had a sort of a negative reaction to the Bonanno interview. But we kept in dialogue. And at the end of it, a person said to me, I don't know what I agree with and what I don't, but this conversation's been helpful. It makes me think that, the mental health industry in general, telling me about my traumas has sort of messed with my mind a little bit. So it's something that I have to rethink. So I wanted to say that because what you're saying is that there's this idea that once you're traumatized. And so that just sticks with you. But you can spend things in a different way, no matter what the circumstance. And there's there's just no rule. You can't say there's a type of person or a type of event, or even the combination of a type of person and a type of event that makes someone stuck in the mud forever, or at least, unable to.
You and I are 100%, and Bonanno I mean, we would all say you should never get so down on any trauma in your life. And God knows if you're not dead, you still have had some horrible traumas that, I mean, people have been in concentration camps.
Mm-hmm.
You nonetheless have to feel that there's somewhere to look forward to and getting beyond that, and dwelling in that worst moment isn't best. So we believe that. And, Martin Seligman and his whole operation believes that. And there's a lot of justification for that in terms of people turning out better. I mean, your interview with Bonanno, I mean, you're, whether by your own beliefs or by being influenced by me, you have your inclination is to be facilitative, and I can maybe push in another direction. So I thought what you did with Bonanno was that you were good in trying to get. People who are professors at Columbia tend to be fairly political.
Mm-hmm.
Even Carl Hart, they're not going to go say, even though what they're doing is kind of totally out there. Oh, trauma has been oversold, or Carl, take heroin, it can be good for you.
Yeah.
They're still going to be very judicious. And I thought you did a fairly good job of like pushing to the edges without pissing him off. So you're exploring that same territory, but in a slightly different direction. Let's turn to you now. We're trying to
only fair, yeah.
So the questions are: what did you learn most this past year about yourself and mistakes you want to avoid?
I'm thinking of one in particular. You talked about me as a parent and as a helper. Maybe we'll get to this, but I don't think I'm as pacifist as you might think I am. But my daughter, as much as I'm so interested in fully backing Lenore Sknazy's work, free range kids, the kids just need to have experiences. I'm really good about making sure that my daughter has her own experiences, that I'm not overprotective of her. And I can't imagine I wouldn't continue to do that, except I've found that when I'm with her, when I bring her, let's say to my folks' house or to another friend's house, or I'm there when she's interacting with another adult, I have these insecurities where I think about myself as a child and how hard it was for people to understand what I was saying. Usually it was like, I understood what was going on, plus I wanted to go in a little more depth with it, and people mistook the depth for a total lack of understanding. And I see that with her sometimes, but she's only 3. So I correct people all the time. I am being a helicopter
you
parent.
Correct her recipients?
I correct other adults who are trying to engage with her, and almost in like a pathological way if I'm not careful. Like she'll be trying to say something, or people will be trying to correct her, and I'll step in and say, no, she meant this. And I've caught myself doing that. And I think that's important because I'm a preacher, an evangelist for the opposite way of doing things. So that's something that I've talked to some people about who I may have interacted with that way. And I'm working on.
I feel well, with my grandchildren, I might tend to do that more because I feel with my own children, I feel I was pretty good at letting them do their thing. And if the other person didn't appreciate it, just sitting back and notice, I felt I was okay on that. Sometimes I'd be really impressed with how well my own children express something. And I thought the person listening really didn't get it all, but I was willing to let that happen. And let the consequences come out where they may. I mean, I guess you could talk to her afterwards and say, "Oh, do you think let's not put anybody down, but do you think Grandma understood what you were saying?"
Right. And as she gets older, I think that'll have to be the direction that I go to, and that lends itself more to me being able to let go and her being able to explore more than me trying to overcorrect every time that I'm with her. I just need to let things be the way that they are.
Feel that I mean, you told one story about your daughter, which is everybody loves so much. It was so touching. But I thought she's so Zach-like. Do you ever worry about that? The story was when she watched The Grinch, she said, "Oh, I'd be friends with the Grinch and they wouldn't be so mean." I sort of thought, well, that's what Zach would say. You're a little old for the Grinch. Do you ever worry that you're moving her too far down in your lane, like that she's doing the learning the whole Rhoads routine or anything? Well, not that it's a great routine.
I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. I don't think so. My wife and I are different enough. And there's something about, my wife and I have to negotiate about what should or shouldn't be said at certain times or done. So I think we balance each other out enough that when we're around and we're trying to guide her with values and understanding of things, that I can just be reflective and not pushy. And I think generally I'm not pushing my own things onto her, my own, quirks or whatever onto her.
When I look at my three kids, I think, well, they're all very self-reliant, but they all can hold jobs, which I attribute to my wife's skills. So I figure, okay, my kid, I wouldn't want anybody to live my kind of life, for better or worse. And for worse is, well, I'm a single old man. And for better is, you can't just swim upstream and navigate the universe your whole life, except I did. But I sort of wouldn't want to wish that on my
Don't
kids.
necessarily recommend it, right?
And so the fact that, on their own, they can all function within organizations, I say, thank God. I wouldn't want them just be swimming free form in the ocean.
Right. Well, my wife helped instill this in me, or I guess turn my mind to it or my attention to it. I can look at this totally positively, that she might have quirks and experiences or whatever you want to call them that I could totally lock in with and understand. And in that sense, I'd be a very good person for her to talk to about them. And on the other hand, she's going to have experiences that are totally different than mine. And to the extent that she wants me to help guide her through it or reflect with her, that'll be an interesting exercise for me to really just be listening rather than trying to put my own input.
We're getting a little bit back to my interacting with my friend, where, you don't want to, they call it manspeaking or mansplaining, whatever they call it, where, being helpful doesn't actually mean being helpful.
Right. So that is,
there's a certain level at which you just sort of scratch your chin and say, huh.
Right. And that's my goal, is to, even though I'm pretty good at letting her be her own person, I'm there as a responsible, realistic role as a parent, but I let her explore. I have a tendency, if I'm not watching out for it, to correct other people in situations where she's talking with them and, chancing ruining.
You're talking about your child back.
I'm talking about my kid, yeah, and chancing ruining the whole damn thing. And that's like what you mean. Sometimes being helpful isn't being helpful. Sometimes trying to be helpful isn't super helpful. So just letting things happen is a goal.
What's your, do you have any special goal for the new year that you want to enunciate or anything? Is there anything, you had a decent year. Everybody's happy and healthy. You're working well. Is there anything that you need to achieve in the new year that, you felt didn't happen this past year?
I'm roping my wife into this one again. She and I were talking. We went to dinner the other night and discussed, our past decade together, being together and then being married. And we talked about, is there anything we would have done differently? And we were totally open about it. Oh, maybe we would have waited a little longer to get married if we knew that we were just still going to be married and have the same life. So then we were discussing, well, how can we use this, what we just talked about now? How can our discussion about what we could have done differently inform what we do right now in terms of, can we be more patient about things? Can we have more of a life balance? Can we not see so many things as emergencies And can we just be present in the moment? Because every time you see something as an emergency, you're kind of not there until the thing happens, which is usually not as bad as you think anyway. So that's my goal, is to be generally more mindful, and specifically in my relationship with family and friends.
And to be less emergency oriented, or have less extreme reactions. Is that
less extreme? That's what I mean by emergency. Yeah, just have less extreme reactions. For some reason, my reaction to COVID in general wasn't very extreme. You might even think I went on the other end.
Well, you're professionally, when you say your job is to come in an emergency, your defined occupation as interventionist is to come into a situation and not panic. They can panic on their own. Mm-hmm. Your job is to you're a firefighter kind of at work, at least before you branched out. So that seems to be a strength of yours.
Well, yeah, but like you, that's a great strength of mine in a framework. And sometimes I have trouble mapping that onto everything else. Sort of like when you said, you're a great clinician, but sometimes you need to read the situation and know that you're not supposed to be putting on a clinical hat, or at least if you want to do that, to remember golden rules about doing clinical work, which is to, be a listener, not necessarily an advice giver. And so I have the same sort of stuff that I'm trying to work out. So that's what I'm thinking about moving forward.
Any last minute thoughts, as the year comes to an end, or anything else that we missed in this that you hope for in this segment?
No, that's it. I wanted to lay things on the table, make ourselves a little bit vulnerable. We've been accused you put anything online, you get feedback. So I don't take it out too seriously, but there have been people who said, "Oh, you just create profundity out of nowhere," or you're arrogant, or you think you know the way of the world, but the world doesn't conform to you. Things like that. And my response to that could be a curt one, but I would rather that our response to that be something like, we're not actually saying that we think we're perfect, or that we, if the world was in our hands, it would be perfect. And I like the idea that we're able to talk about what our goals are in a very human way. So I appreciate you doing that.
That's what I strive for in my memoir. I'm obviously very impressed by my own work and thinking, but I certainly enumerate, I hope. Archie, Ethan had seen a bit of my memoir, and he at his
Archie's your friend and colleague, in case people don't know.
Archie's my friend and colleague and co-author of Love and Addiction, Ethan Nailman. Mm-hmm. And we were at his retirement party, and for 1 minute, him and Archie were chatting, and Ethan said, "Oh, well, Stanton's claiming, look what Norman Zinberg missed that Stanton got." So Stanton-like. And then Archie said, "But there are other parts in the book where he just says things about himself that most, people aren't going to admit."
Yeah.
And, one joke that Archie would cite that I make in the book is, I know you think it's hard to imagine that I should imagine I should get a Nobel Prize when I can't even get a job at a university. And Archie thought that was a pretty good joke on myself, and I mean, I've got high aspirations, but I can't even function at a normal university level institutionally.
Well, let me bring this to a close. There's a technique in sort of persuasion that people use. They call it the 8 Mile technique. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, but the rapper Eminem gets up in a freestyle battle, and then the first thing he does is diss himself. All the things he thinks anyone could say about him, he just brings them to the forefront. And then when that's done, then he goes on his opponent. And okay, that's a good way to do things, except I'd like to think we take it to another level where we say, here are some faults of ours. And we're probably not even disclosing the worst things about ourselves, but here's some faults of ours. But we do, while we're not perfect, we do like to think constructively about it. And when we're at our best, here's how we think constructively about it, which, offers a good way into business.
I say this all the time about my kids. I mean, I know kids who live at home and I know children who've died. So, we're in that line of work. We certainly know kids who've been in rehab, and we know kids who haven't launched. I mean, and so you have to appreciate the problems that people have, and then just say, as long as, well, you met my friend, the trumpet player, John, and, I'll close with his father's wisdom. I always love his father's just a guy who stocked supermarkets. He was an intermediary, and he said to John, I love you unconditionally. I hope you love me, but that's not the most important. That's not the essential thing. The essential thing is that you'll be able to go out in the world and stand on your own 2 feet. That's the essential thing.
That's good advice. So with that, I hope that this influences people to think about their own goals, their own lives, that whatever, you're not perfect and neither are we. So, and as you set goals, don't make them so lofty that they're not achievable, but don't make them so light that, wouldn't make a difference in your life. So with that, happy holidays to everybody. Happy New Year, and see you in 2022.
Sign off on that.